So, right now, I am grating butter, and this is not even the weirdest shit I've done today. Hi, welcome to the Black Pill. We're making blueberry scones today. One recipe is going to be blueberry lemon scones for my wife, and the other is going to be blueberry maple scones for me, just to see how that goes. And the very first step in making scones is grating butter. So, right now, I am grating butter, and this is not even the weirdest shit I've done today. All right, so we're making blueberry scones, and we're talking about Superman. Why Superman? Why the hell not, man? So one thing that happens when you start getting educated is you stop falling for BS as much. That's good. But it also can really ruin your enjoyment of movies and television. And so the title of today's whatever this is Blueberry Scones. And, dude, why is Superman jacked? Yeah, why is Superman jacked up? Okay, so the first thing is you want to grate your butter. I have to do 2 sticks like this. So grate your butter, get most of it off of the thing and off of your hands. And then that has to go in the freezer. It's better to grate kind of refrigerated butter. Like you can stick it in the freezer, get the butter really hard, and then try and grate it. But it's just going to rip up your knuckles and stuff. It's way easier to grate refrigerated butter and then freeze it. It does stretch out your recipe. Like you have to plan a little bit in advance to get that to happen. So Superman. Superman is an alien. Is Superman an alien? Is Superman an alien though? No, Superman's imaginary. But in the very first imagining of Superman back in, shoot, I forget what year, I'll link it. He's from Krypton. He can't do very much, like in the very first comics. Superman can't do very much. He can jump high. He could leap a tall building in a single bound, maybe. By the first TV show about Superman, he could do that. And like he was strong and he could, push a car or beat up a gangster or something. And those were really small kinds of problems. And it was somewhat plausible. Maybe Superman on Krypton grows up under more than one Earth gravity. And so when he matures on Earth, under the yellow sun, he's a bit stronger than a regular person. Okay, the basic recipe, we need 2 cups of flour. Superman, depending on the time period, like the internet says, Superman's consistently 6'3", 235 pounds. That is very, very burly indeed. And the Christopher Reeve 70s and 80s movies, he was 6'4" and 225 pounds. Also, tall, like even taller, but super burly. Half a cup of sugar there, like a little extra. Why? Why does he have to be so big? It's clear, and you'll see why in a second, that none of Superman's power has anything to do with his gross morphology. And like when you think of the Supergirl, why not Superwoman? Think of the Supergirl franchise. She is slight and slender and nothing like as mesomorphic as the big guy. What is this actually about? Well, if you get into some late 90s criticism, there's maybe, what do I need here? I need 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Baking powder is going to make this like crunchy and good. So 2.5 teaspoons. There's 1, 2. Yeah, so that kind of criticism, it has some language in it like internalized anti-Semitism. The 2 lads who invented the Superman, apparently, Jewish fellows. And I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't necessarily want to go there. Do that later. A teaspoon of salt. It's like one really good solid teaspoon of salt there. There is something though about gender and hegemonic masculinity, which was the language of the age. Toxic masculinity would be the language of this age. All right, those are my dry things. I'm just going to whisk this dry stuff all together in here. You know, no tricks, no weirdness happening on that one. And then let's get some wet stuff going. All right, so let's work on some of our wet ingredients. I need a half cup of cream. So let's get that going here. Half a cup of cream. I need an egg. Just going to throw that right in here so that I can mix it in and I know it's going to evenly distribute through my dough. I need about a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Which one of these is a teaspoon? So in the early days, like Superman, they started writing the thing, publishing the thing. It was pulp. It was super cheap. It wasn't meant to last. And it was like unexpectedly very, very popular. It was so popular that within a short amount of time, you know, there was a TV show, George Reeves. Is that right? I'll fix it in post. And then there was a proliferation of superheroes. Like superhero became a genre unto itself. All right, here's that butter that I froze earlier. Just gonna throw that in here. Yeah, it freezes pretty quick. Yeah, superhero becomes a genre unto itself. I don't know if anyone remembers the John Landis film, An American Werewolf in London, a horror comedy classic. Well, in those days, and in the early days of superhero, cutting tool. I've been doing a lot of baking lately, enough that I have one of these. I'm just going to mash that frozen butter into the flour until it takes on a pea-like consistency. It was enough in those days that the special effects and the backstory, I mean, they were the whole story. American Werewolf in London barely has a romance in it. There's some Nightingale syndrome going on. You know, the guy falls in love with the nurse, whatever. His buddy kind of torments him about the afterlife. And there's some people with weird accents, and they're pretty backwards and strange. But really the story is, I mean, Jack doesn't have to make any moral decisions or contemplate the use of power or think about the fact that at night on full moons he's a murderer. He goes through the transformations, and that's cool. And that's all people really needed to see. And in the early days of the superhero thing, man, that's all anyone needed. They needed a superpower that would set someone apart, right? So you have to have a cool superpower, and you have to have a cool origin story, and that is the whole story. There's nothing more to it than that, right? So Superman comes out, it has all that, and then all the imitators, they do the same thing. Spider-Man's bitten by a radioactive spider, and you know, people get their powers in different ways, and that's cool. And that's literally all that is needed. Which puts Superman in a bind. The bind is Superman's not that cool. He was in the early days when he was the only superhero on the block. He was the baddest bitch out there. It didn't need any more than that. But in order to keep up and keep selling copies in a marketplace increasingly full of weirder and strange and more colorful and bizarre superheroes, they had to keep changing him up. So one thing they would do is periodically kill him. So Superman dies and he comes back, and then Superman has a son for a minute, and that's a thing. Superman's black for a second, and that's a thing. And they always end up, you know, reverting the timeline. I I'm going to try a cup of these blueberries. So I throw those in there. If it's a little sloppy, it doesn't matter. These are fresh blueberries, and probably dried blueberries would be better. Better for this recipe. Oh, I didn't get any lemon going. Hang on. Yep, here's my, yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna use the same Menke thing I used for butter, and I'm shredding, or attempting to shred. It's not working. The rind, here we go. Just shred some rind off the outside of this lemon, and we'll pretend that is lemon zest. This way. Here we go, it's better. All right, the zest of one lemon to make my wife happy. So the other thing Superman has to do to compete in this marketplace is he has to keep having new powers. And so I was never much of a comic book guy. Is that about a teaspoon? I was never much of a comic book guy. I remember the movies from the 80s. I grew up with those movies. When I was 11, I had this really gnarly Superman-themed cake. What I didn't know is my mom didn't know how to make cake, and so, like, an old British recipe for cake is literally a new American recipe for cornbread. And so I grew up thinking that cornbread was cake. Freaked me out the first time my wife made cornbread, because I thought she was serving me birthday cake for dinner, which was weird. Anyway, I remember the Christopher Reeve version of Superman, and like, what superpowers does he have? The answer to that is whatever superpowers he needs. So, in the beginning, you get the origin story in Marlon Brando, whatever, and he grows up on the farm, and he gets the Fortress of Solitude. Marlon Brando tells him who he is and why he's that way, whatever. Okay, that's good, that's fine, nice. And then through the course of the thing, we learn that he's very, very strong. He can run very fast. He has laser beam eyes when a thing comes along that would take like lasers to solve. See if I can get this into some kind of coherent dough here. See, that's very loose, very powdery. You want it that way. You're not failing if you have loose powdery dough. You know, and his dad tells him he can never reveal himself. So he gets the Superman costume at the Fortress of Solitude, and then he's Superman and whatever. Yeah, it's good. It's fine. But over the course of the series of movies, he needs weirder and weirder powers to solve problems. So at one point in Superman 3, there's a fire, he has to put it out. So he uses his breath to like freeze an entire lake. Yeah, he freezes a lake with his breath, and then he picks up the entire lake and carries it to the fire and melts it over the fire and puts the fire out. He has a special chamber at the Fortress of Solitude. And the chamber, magically, just when he's thinking about having a human romance and like how awful it would be to he's thinking about how awful it would be to like outlive Lois Lane. Like, if you want to have a human relationship, you ought to be a human. And so his father reveals through the crystals, there's this magic chamber at the Fortress of Solitude, and you can go in that chamber, and it'll zap away all your Kryptonian powers. How magic. Science magic. And it just is that way. That's what he needs. That's what he gets, and later that's how he defeats General Zod, and so forth. So Superman has whatever powers he seems to need in a moment. Okay, so I've got my dough into this sort of dome shape in the middle. All right, get yourself a nice dome shape. Really nice sharp knife, that's what you need next. Okay. And then General Zod, he's more evidence that the body just doesn't really matter, because Zod is kind of, I mean, he's a little bit built, but he's not Christopher Reeve's built. And he has a monkey. He has this giant dude who's like 6'6" and a bodybuilder and stuff, and he does all the heavy lifting. But any of those three people in Superman 2 are totally capable of throwing a bus at somebody or burning a building down with their laser eyes, whatever. This doesn't come from their body. But what happens is we've seen all that before. And so, like, feats of strength just become so mundane. You know, by the end of that franchise with Christopher Reeve, he's picking up buses and throwing them. And he can fly. He can't just jump high. He can fly. But he can already, like, zoom so fast around planet Earth that he has a relativistic effect. He reverses its passage through time. The Earth goes backwards. Time goes backwards. And so he can save Lois Lane. This is super crumbly. But just trust. All this super crumble stuff, when it comes out of the oven, is going to be really, really, really schmexy. So just get these on your pan, kind of arrange them however you can. Right, but then they start doing the reboots, and by the 2000s, like, being strong is totally mundane. No one cares that someone's strong. So in Superman Returns, Superman literally stops an airplane from crashing by getting under it. And the physics of that are just atrocious. Like, there's no place that you could get under an airplane. If you were strong enough to lift a plane, there's no place on that plane you could lift it from. It's just not built for that kind of, the pounds per square inch that would take to do that. Okay, so that's ready to go in the oven. It needs to get cold though, because of the butter. You don't want it to melt out. You want it to get stuck in there. So I'm going to stick this in the freezer. We're going to start over and do that all again with a second recipe. So yeah, by Superman Returns, there's like an explicit Christic narrative here where Superman can hear everything that's happening on Earth all at once. He hears all people's complaints and traumas and dramas and requests for intervention. And he can't do everything for everyone. So he's just, like, at one point floating in the sky, worrying about his inability ultimately to solve all human problems. You know, and that's a very Christic story, a very Jesus narrative. It really turned me off. So that's the one where bullets are literally bouncing off of his eyeballs, and there's no realistic challenge for him, and he can literally lift continents even with kryptonite embedded in his back. And this is where we really lose touch. The problem here is no amount of muscle can make somebody fly. Yeah, in order to fly, you need to interact with air molecules in some aerodynamic fashion. That's what it takes to fly. There's no way that you can jump so hard that you can maneuver midair like Superman. Or when there's a plane pushing down on you, push upwards against nothing and cause the plane to stop falling. There's no way that a 225 or even 235 pound man can get in front of a train and cause that train to stop. That's not about being strong. That's about being massive. That's impossible. What I'm saying, get this trip, what I'm saying is there is no amount of muscle that can enable the feats that Superman performs. And you already know this because Supergirl can replicate those feats without the muscle, as can General Zod, and as can the sexy British lady who's in his entourage in Superman 2. Okay? So why is he so huge? He doesn't need to be huge, and other Kryptonians aren't that huge. What is the point of his giant physique and his, I mean, the comics are even more exaggerated. He looks like two Arnold Schwarzeneggers in one body, absolutely ripped to shreds. Why? It doesn't do anything. You don't need that muscle to perform the feats, and no amount of muscle will enable you to perform those feats. Right? Lifting a car is one thing in the 1940s. Stopping bullets with your eyeball and lifting a continent, that's something else entirely. He doesn't need it. Why does he have it? And another question, how did he get it? What I mean by that is muscle is built through resistance. So I didn't cut in my butter. Yeah, muscle is built through resistance. That is, if I wanted to get big, I would need to go to the gym and I would need to lift some stuff that's a bit too heavy for me. I'd have to lift it over and over until my muscles were exhausted, burned out. And then I'd need to rest, go back 2 days later and do the same thing and keep doing that. I'm obviously totally not interested in any way in doing that, but that's what it would take for me to get huge. And Superman can lift a continent. In Superman Returns, he literally lifts a continent. And in the other Superman franchises, Dean, what's his name, who turned out to be a giant Trump-voting Nazi, shivers so fast, vibrates so fast, that he phases out of space and phases back in outside of some weird containment grid or something. Like, that's stupid. No amount of muscle can enable those performances. No amount is needed. But even if they were muscular performances, then you're so strong that nothing mundane could provide any resistance. I remember Dean, what's his name, in that Superman show, Lois and Clark, that was called. And he's like going through his morning workout. What would Superman's morning workout look like? Right? Like CrossFit challenges crunk people. What would challenge Superman? He can fly so fast around the earth that time goes backwards. What's he gonna do? Even bench pressing an Amtrak train would not provide any resistance. There'd be nothing there to exhaust him, even to begin to challenge him. So how did he get so big? How did he get so big? It's neither necessary nor sufficient for Superman to be that big. And so there's something else going on here. And that something else is toxic masculinity. Did those young lads in the 30s or 40s or whatever, did they write toxic masculinity into Superman? No. If you look at George, the first TV actor, he just looks like some schlub. I mean, he's big, but he's kind of big like me. Like, you take me and stuff me in a Superman uniform. And the early comics, I mean, kind of sane. There weren't bodybuilders. They didn't know how to draw bodybuilders. And so the artists increasingly are conveying this picture of masculinity as incredibly muscular, huge, crunk, without, they don't have physics degrees. They're not thinking this all the way through. What would it mean for someone to be that big? All of the powers are magical powers. There's something else going on here, and that's this aspiration, teenage boys reading the comics in their room at night when their parents think they're asleep. And what would they think that a masculine man would look like? Well, let's take that and let's exaggerate it and feed it to them. And then certainly by the late 60s, Schwarzenegger's out there competing. He's Mr. Universe and stuff like that. And then those previous drawings just get to be really mundane. In the light of Schwarzenegger, like 50s Superman is so mundane that you need a 60s man. And then when we've seen that, they have to just they just have to keep getting bigger and bigger, less and less realistic. And then actual people have to do that too, right? The more that we've seen Schwarzenegger, the more that just looking normal seems kind of weak and wimpy and feminine. And there's nothing more fragile in this world than masculinity, right? And so we're all under all under a certain amount of pressure to get jacked up. And that's why we start doing CrossFit in the morning. I guess that's all I wanted to say about Superman. I didn't really plan this with my recipes. So here's my second dough. I'm just making it that nice dome shape. And then I'm gonna cut this with my sharp knife, load it onto a pan. I've got my oven preheating. Oven's on 400. And in a second, we'll throw some stuff in it. Oh yeah, these are gonna be maple blueberry, but it's gonna be, this is just blueberry. I'm gonna do a maple whipped cream, do an experiment with that and see if that works. A maple whipped cream to go on top. Okay, there's my oven's preheated. It's on 400. Here comes my first batch. Gonna slap those in there. Superman through the 80s was allowed to be good. It was by the mid to late 90s that we became, let's put this on 22 minutes. That's very specific. It's going to be all right. By the 90s, we'd become really disillusioned. Like, the world isn't that simple anymore. No one's entirely good or bad, and we understand that in a way our parents and grandparents didn't. And so, like, truth, justice, and the American way, it's not holding up well under scrutiny. Not after Vietnam, man. Not after Vietnam. And, like, today, we're well aware. So by the 90s, heroes... There was no such thing anymore as a pure hero or a pure villain, and it gets really confusing. Man, missed opportunity. The Nicolas Cage Superman movie that never got made. I want to see it. I want to see it. I might not like it. But I'd like to see it. Yeah, that could be really... subversive. That could be really super subversive. Could be all right. So that's it. We're baking. We're baking and we're waiting. Okay. Hang out with me. Okay, I'm gonna try some maple whipped cream. See if this holds together. I'm not gonna make you listen to my beater beating. This is really good, by the way. This is a Black & Decker stand mixer that I took off the stand and lost the stand for like 20 years ago. And this guy, it's literally 23 and a half years old, and it works like a champ. I don't work like a champ anymore, but it does. Let me put that together. And so just a little bit more stuff about enforcing types. What Superman really does is enforce a type. The original writers intended that way. You know, I doubt it. There's some literature that conflicts on the topic. Old kind of literature conflicts on the topic. In modernity, that it's hard to argue with. And one of the things that makes it so hard to argue with is what happens when people who aren't men or aren't white men get involved in the franchise. So General Zod has his two companions, and like having a woman be a villain in this and have the superpowers, that itself was revolutionary when they did Superman 2. What year was that? 81, 82? So that was kind of special. But she was hot. Her point, the point of her was to put on those skin-tight black leathers and portray a certain kind of hotness. When it comes to Supergirl, she's a certain type. She's not hyper masculine because the Superman's strength has nothing to do with his body. Has nothing to do with it. He's a type. And when a woman or a girl has those powers, she's also enforcing a type. And that type is a certain amount of sexual availability, a certain amount of fertility. Ah, man, I hate superheroes. So let's whip up this whipped cream and see what we get. There's my whipped cream. Maple syrup whipped cream came out pretty good. You know, nice texture, good consistency there. Tastes like maple syrup whipped cream. We'll find out later on if that's good on blueberry scones. There's absolutely more going on in superhero movies than enforcing masculine and feminine body types. Check out Dan Olson. There's some stuff about why. Oh, my timer's going off. Why would Superman surrender in the newest Superman movie with another General Zod in it? Why would Superman surrender to the U.S. military? That's a whole thing. It has to do with the U.S. Department of the Army contributing money to filmmaking, and that is propaganda. There's some stuff about having to appeal. Oh, look at these! Look at those guys right there. Having to appeal to an international market, which means when they're making these superhero movies, they know that the majority of money they're going to make is going to come out of China. And so they have to make movies that they can get past the Chinese censors. And therefore, here, look at this stuff right here. Look how those came out. And therefore, even though we don't live in China, the needs of the Chinese government, the messages that they want to send to their people, they absolutely inform American filmmaking. So we're only scratching the very surface of this particular phenomenon talking about body typing.